Welcome to AIDS Vision. I'm your volunteer host, Allison Arngrim. And today on AIDS Vision, we're going to be talking about the Southern California AIDS Hotline. And with us is Bob Schoonover, who is Program Manager of the AIDS Hotline, and Lee Klosinski, Assistant Program Manager of the Southern California AIDS Hotline. Welcome.
Hi, Allison.
Thank you.
Well, Bob, you I have known for quite some time, being a hotline volunteer myself. But for people who have just tuned in, what exactly is the Southern California AIDS Hotline, and what does it do?
Well, it's a toll-free line supported by the state of California, and we provide information, referrals, and emotional support to anyone concerned about AIDS. And it's staffed by volunteers, and there's a 7-week training course that each volunteer goes through to become a fully informed AIDS encyclopedia.
And what is it you do there as Program Manager?
Well, oversee the program, try to manage the grants and write proposals and kind of supervise what goes on, do some training.
How wide an area does the hotline cover at this point?
Half the state of California, from Kern County south to the Mexican border. We also have a 213 number, and we get calls from all over the country and from occasionally other countries on that number.
So if people are willing to pay the dime and make the call, they can call literally from anywhere.
Sure. We've even had times when several years ago we were written up in Newsweek or Time, and people in other parts of the country would use a magnifying glass and get our number off the posters and call us.
So we get calls from everywhere. I know having done that, I've taken calls from states where they didn't have as good a hotline as Southern California, so we got the calls. Lee, what is your function at the hotline?
I have two main areas of responsibility. One is working with volunteers, and working with volunteers means recruiting them, training them, and sustaining them so that their hotline experience is a good volunteer fit for us and for them. The other area of responsibility I have is making sure that all of the nuts and bolts of the hotline work smoothly. So that means looking for new referrals, making sure the ones that we have are accurate, making sure that all the support systems are in place, people can find the information that they need.
So that when people call, people know what they're talking about when they answer the phone. When we talk about referrals, what are some of the things that if you called the hotline you would be referred to?
People want information about testing sites, physician referrals, emotional support. People call in with questions about insurance, mortuaries, just about everything you can imagine related to the epidemic.
Now, your referral list is pretty extensive. I mean, would you say you have all of the doctors who work with AIDS in your referral list, or is it just a select group?
Well, we don't have all the doctors who work with AIDS. There are doctors who deal with this epidemic whose practices are full and can't take new patients. We have the physicians and other healthcare providers who would choose to list with us, and occasionally we do mailings to try to recruit more.
Now, what does someone have to do to get on your referral list? How are they screened or approved so that if someone is calling the hotline, they know that a number they get from you is going to be good?
Well, when it comes to our physicians especially, we verify the information they give us, including their license number, whether or not they're board eligible or certified, and whether they know anything about AIDS. And we make it clear to our callers that what we're not actually saying this is a good service and giving like a personal recommendation. We're giving a referral saying this is a service that's provided and you can select from this. And we try to give 2 or 3 options for every caller.
Oh, so they get to pick and choose.
Right.
Give a list. Now, what are some of the typical things? What is your most common call? What do people usually call the hotline for? Don't laugh. I see that look on your face. What is the usual call on the hotline as opposed to the unusual ones?
I think today in 1991, we get a lot of calls about testing, which is different from when I first became involved in the hotline 4 years ago, when a lot of calls were about transmission. Second to testing is safer sex and what constitutes safer sex. And after that, probably just general questions about treatment, and the epidemic, various aspects of the epidemic.
So all aspects are covered. Now, what do you tell someone, for instance, if they call the hotline and they say, I want to get tested, I think I might have this, what do I do? What is your first line of attack?
The first thing that I want to make sure is that the caller understands what the test is and what it is not. So I say, are you familiar with the test, or are you worried about a recent exposure? So that's the primary thing. I want to explain it's not a diagnostic test for full-blown AIDS, that people have to understand what the window period is, and they have to understand what the results mean and don't mean.
And then if they want to be tested, do you tell them where places are available?
Yes,
So if a person does want to get tested, the hotline is a place to find this out.
exactly,
But you're also going to make sure they know what they're getting into.
precisely.
And what is your response when someone calls up with a sexual situation and says, is this safe, is this not safe? Tell me now. And they give you specifics. What is your response to the safer sex question?
Well, that varies from call to call. The important thing is trying to bring the caller back to the basics about transmission and assisting them in assessing the types of behaviors that they want to engage in, helping them judge the relative risk or safety of a variety of practices. So I don't want to stand as judge, but I want them to become informed and enabled so that they can take control of their own life and make decisions about what their limits are.
Well, having been on the hotline and having called it, I'm aware that there's a very big focus on the caller's responsibility, that the hotline is there to help the caller do what they need to do. Although sometimes you do have people who do call you up and ask directly for advice. What is it you do in your training to enable your people answering the phone to deal with people who are going to want them to tell them flat out an answer?
Well, we try to teach ways of helping people do some problem solving, checking through their options and evaluating them. What we try to do is give pros and cons for each choice, help the person explore what their options are, if it's a safe sex thing, what the relative risk is, and then assist them in making the choice rather than making the choice for them.
So you don't tell people what to do on the hotline?
No, we'll tell them what makes sense, what doesn't, if you choose option A, then we'll try to explore what the results of that will be and help them make a choice based on what they want to accomplish and what the outcome will be.
But if someone calls for specific information, you are also a huge warehouse of the latest AIDS information. And how do you manage to do that in 7 weeks, that the people who answer the phone at the hotline are aware of as much stuff as they are aware of? I mean, there is so much between treatment and the different medications and the different symptoms and the safer sex. How do you get all that into your training in 7 weeks?
Well, the learning process doesn't stop at the end of 7 weeks. We try to cover the basics of everything we'll need to talk about in that 7-week course. It's a real intensive course. And at the end of that, they have a room full of resources where they can look things up. They have more experienced listeners to help them. If they get stuck on a question, they can come to a staff or a volunteer shift leader or a more experienced listener. And we also try to refer. If someone's going to call and ask about treatments or clinical trials, I'll tell them what I know, give them the information and what we're aware of, and then refer them to other sources of information for more specific information.
But you also have the statistical information on hand. So if they have a question, say, about the number of people with AIDS in Los Angeles or in California, you have access to that information.
Right, and we use a lot of that helping people prepare for school reports, helping reporters prepare articles. We give a lot of information.
Yeah, I've had the calls from people doing the reports. Now, when I went through this, there was also a rather extensive exam at the end of hotline training.
Yeah, it's a final exam, and everyone who takes the training passes with an 80%, or we'll work with them to bring them up to that level before they work the line.
I'm sort of stressing that because I want people to know when they call the hotline that anyone who's on that line has been through 7 weeks of training and has gotten 80% or better on the exam.
Yeah, and the people that do take the training are real committed and get into this, and most of them score well on the exam.
Well, we're going to look at some of the people who did score 80% or better. We have some footage of actual hotliners at work, so we're going to look at this and you can tell us what's going on over here.
Okay, hotline volunteers answering calls.
What's he doing with the clipboard?
We keep statistical records for our grant sources on each call, things like where the call came from, what we talked about, if a referral was given. And you can see a bit kind of in the corner there, our referral book, where you can look up all the referrals.
So it's right in front of them. If they don't know it, they'll look it up.
Right, there's one at each phone, and there are 6 phones in the room. Each one has a little listening booth.
So she's got the little booth.
Mhm.
This is a full day. How many phones? It's 6 phones?
6 phones. Yeah, at any given time, there'll be anywhere from 1 to 6 volunteers in there answering calls.
And if there's nobody on the phone, there's an answering machine?
There's an answering machine, 2 machines, one to take messages and one to give out referral information for other AIDS support organizations.
Now, what happens if you leave a message on the Southern California AIDS hotline? I mean, what happens when they call you back?
Well, when they call you back, they're not going to say where they're from or why they're calling until they're sure they have you on the phone or the person that left the message. We try to protect the confidentiality of our callers.
So if you call the AIDS hotline and you leave a message, they're not going to call back and get your mother on the phone and tell her that you just called the AIDS hotline?
Right. They'll be kind of evasive and not say who's calling for a while.
We also have people relaxing here at the phones.
Right.
So yeah, there are breaks in the day.
Yeah.
Now, besides also information and safer sex and transmission, you also do support calls. I mean, you also have people who call in who are just upset, who may have lost someone or may just be frightened. What do you do with callers who just want someone to talk to or are calling you because they're scared?
Well, we talk to them. If there's any information to work with in terms of putting their fears into perspective, we'll try to do that. Beyond that, we're there to give support and to be able to talk it through. And there's a real advantage to talking it through with someone who knows something about it and who is anonymous also.
That's the other thing. Even when you take statistics, there's no names taken. You have no idea who's on that phone.
Right. We just get general things, zip codes they call from, ethnic background, age ranges, things like that.
Now, having called on days when you were doing statistics, you do also ask your callers if they are gay, straight, or bi, and approximately how old they are.
Right.
Yeah, can you give the reason for this? Because a lot of people are a little alarmed at first when they call and are asked that.
Well, the state of California bases a lot of what they do on numbers and ability to reach certain populations. So if they're trying to target gay men as a population, they're going to want to know how many gay men we talk to or how many bisexual women we talk to. So those are the kinds of general statistics we report back to the state.
We have another PSA, I believe. We're going to do a roll-in here. It's just roll-in central today, so we'll be right back.
About AIDS.
Is what we need. The life that love can bring. Come take my hand and understand the answer is love. Love is what we need. Open up your heart and understand. The answer is love.
And we're back, and joining us is Randi Swindel, who is a 3-year veteran volunteer on the Southern California AIDS Hotline. Welcome, Randi.
Hi, thank you.
Randi, how did you become a volunteer on the AIDS Hotline?
Well, I've done volunteer work in the past, and I always enjoyed it. I got a whole lot more value out of it than the energy I put into it, and I knew it was something I wanted to do. I grew up in San Francisco in the 60s. Great place and time to grow up, but in retrospect, I did engage in some behaviors, I'm sure, that put me at risk. Had a lot of gay friends, so when the epidemic started in the early 80s, it was close to home. Moved to New York in the mid-80s, and there the epidemic had a very different complexion. And being the mother of 2 small children myself, I really saw how it was affecting families really concerned me. I wanted to do something, and I like doing phone work.
You've taken part now and you're on the hotline. How have you enjoyed the last 3 years? How has it affected you?
I love it. I really enjoy it. And the training, by the way, in addition to giving us a lot of, making us experts, is a lot of fun. I want people to know that, for people who are interested in.
I understand they've put back the trust walk. Is this true? There is an
Yes.
exercise. When I took it, there was a thing called the trust walk. And Bob, you're going to have to explain the trust walk.
Well, a lot of the learning that we try to do in our training is experiential. So in order to talk about creating a sense of trust, we do an exercise where we experience creating a sense of trust. And this is where you break up into pairs, and one person is blindfolded and puts their trust in the other person, who then leads them around on a little adventure.
When I took it, I was taken into the men's room.
Sounds like fun. Yeah.
I don't know if it established trust, but it was interesting. But no, I'm glad it's back, because it actually did. I mean, the sense of being the caller where you cannot see the person you're talking to and you're attached to them and in desperate need. Something about being blindfolded and dragged around a building does make that clear to you. So I'm glad you put that back. Did you get to do the trust walk?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And it was fun. It was strange and fun.
Now, being on the hotline, has this word gets out when people know you're on the hotline? How has this affected your life and the way people treat you and ask you things?
I'm an expert, and my friends know it, and certainly my husband, my family, my friends, if they see a blurb in the paper or something, something in the news, they'll check it out with me. Randy, this sounds a little strange. Is this accurate, or what? What is this? So yeah, I'm a walking encyclopedia.
Oh, that's handy. Now, something I wanted to ask too. Speaking of things in the news, we get a lot of rumors on the hotline, I know. What is the rumor of the week? What is the biggest rumor you've had to dispel recently?
I think we're at kind of a break in the rumor supply. The big misconception that I've had in the calls I've taken is the confusion between the incubation period, which can be years, and the window period for production of antibodies.
Oh, could you explain that? Because that one does get switched a lot.
Oh, okay. The average incubation time between infection and the appearance of symptoms is somewhere between 8 and 10 years. The time for antibodies to be produced for almost everyone is between 3 and 6 months.
So the time between when you caught it and when you would be positive on the test is a few weeks or months.
Right.
But the time from when you would test positive to when you get sick could be 10 years.
Right.
That's the switch. It's not you caught it, you won't know on the blood test for 10 years.
And that's the big confusion.
They're still getting that one.
Yeah.
Despite years of press at this point.
But I don't know of any other rumors.
You haven't had any? Have you had?
No fresh rumors. No.
What's the toughest call that you've had as a volunteer?
Probably the guy that was living out of his car. He had AIDS. I mean, absolutely no resources, and his car got towed. So it was, it was sad, and it's frustrating as a listener, because you want to be able to go there, pick the person up, put them in a nice, safe, warm home, and you can't do that. And a lot of our callers really do have no resources, and it's frustrating. Frankly, there's a little anger on the listener's part, I think, that a person would let themselves get in this situation. Why? And you want so much to help them, and we're frustrated at times in our real inability to do anything other than just listen and do what we can. I mean, we have emergency shelter
What can you do
resources, certainly, and so we do what we can in that respect. But a lot of our callers, unfortunately, are really past the point where a night in an emergency shelter is going to solve their problems.
So is there really anything you can do for someone who's in the situation of, their car being towed that they were living in? I mean, is there a resource for that?
Well, again, we do have emergency shelters, and then we can start to work with them on some ways that they can begin to put their lives back in order. A lot of our callers who have AIDS are not clients, for instance, of AIDS Project LA, and we can help get that ball rolling and really start to put them in touch with resources where they can begin to get their lives back together. We certainly can't do it for them.
So someone who may have AIDS and hasn't actually gotten really any help, the hotline would be a place to start.
Yeah, we do have a lot of resources. But again, the caller needs to be willing to take some responsibility.
Now, I've been hearing a lot about burnout, and it is difficult, and it has to be tough to hear these calls over and over again for hours. What do you do? How do you take care of yourself and keep from from all of this getting to you?
Well, I think the beauty of the hotline, and one of the things that I like so much about it, is that you don't get these calls over and over again. My experience has been that the callers that I get are really terrific by and large, and they're inspirational, they're a delight to talk to, and that's one of the reasons that, for me, burnout really has not been a problem. But it can be. It certainly can be, and that's when you've got people like Bob and Lee around that as volunteers we turn to when we have a particularly tough call. Volunteers use each other as sounding boards, and when you do have a real difficult time, we really rely on each other for
So
support.
we now know everyone's going to be calling Bob after this.
Oh, boy.
Bob, what do you do? I wonder, it's been a very long time for you, and you take the calls yourself, and then you take the calls from us volunteers when we can't take the calls anymore. How does Bob Schoonover keep from knuckling under all of this?
Well, I've been doing this for an awfully long time. Before AIDS, if I can use that term, I used to work with a drug abuse hotline in Ohio, and I've been doing this with the AIDS hotline for 6 years, and there's an advantage to my position, and that is when I get frustrated and emotionally caught up in the calls I'm taking, I can take a break and not take calls. I have plenty of other work to do. That helps for me. Having a release at home. I play music, so if I get real frustrated, I go home and I turn my guitar up and make a lot of noise, and that gets it out. But having resources, being able to talk and sharing it with other people, and it's pretty hard to do because there's real strict confidentiality rules. So that's part of why the listeners rely so much on each other, because we don't share explicit information about the calls with other people. I may call Allison, I may call Randi and talk it through, but I will talk it through.
And how do you manage? I see you smiling. You look no worse for wear.
Well, I really enjoy my job, and one of the reasons I enjoy it is because it's connected with why I first came to the hotline. 4 years ago, I had never called the hotline. I was attracted to it because I wanted to learn about AIDS, and I felt the best thing for me to cope with the epidemic and what I saw happening in the community and in the world was through knowledge. The more that I knew, the more empowered I felt. And so now I'm in a position where I get paid to be knowledgeable about HIV and the epidemic, and that gives me a sense of power and control. So I think I'm in a really unique, fortuitous position where, as difficult as any given day may be in dealing with the epidemic, I can still walk away from it feeling like I have some control rather than it's controlling me.
You're doing something. You're not helpless.
Exactly.
I see you nodding your head. Is it the same kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. I would say the same thing that Lee does. To just sit by and see friends die and feel like you can't, still, I can't prevent my friends from dying, but I can certainly do something. And I really feel that I am making a contribution, and I know that, when I pick up that phone and I can give somebody some real hard facts that will enable them to protect themselves, I have a sense that I've done something.
What would you say to someone who's watching now who's interested in maybe becoming a volunteer?
Call AIDS Project LA, ask for volunteer resources, and then get in touch with Lee and Bob. And again, I can't stress enough that you get so much, for those people who haven't volunteered before, you can't really know what it's like until you've done it, and it's so rewarding. You may think, I'm too busy, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy. It's amazing how much more you get back than what you give.
And Bob, for people who are thinking, should I call the hotline, have a question, I don't know, are they going to laugh at me, will they understand? What would you say to someone who's considering phoning in?
I would say by all means call. We very seldom laugh unless the joke is real good. And there are no stupid questions. And I would much prefer to have someone call and ask me a question that I may think is obvious rather than assume a wrong answer. So I would encourage anyone to call.
How many calls do you get, say, in an average day?
I'm not sure about a day, but monthly figures, we get between 4,000 and 6,000 calls each month.
6,000 calls a month?
As many as that, yeah.
Do you answer them all?
Well, part of them are call in at night when we're not open and leave messages or get recorded referral information. But somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 each month we actually do talk to.
So if you call the hotline, don't hang up.
Don't hang up. A lot of people are calling. You may not get through the first time you try, and if you leave a message, we'll be very careful when we do call you back, and we will call you back.
So if anyone wants to get involved, they just simply call APLA and they would sign up and you would put them through the training. Is there any previous experience required?
No prerequisite. We usually start a training each month. Our next one, we alternate morning and evening trainings. Our next one starts at the end of this month. It's a morning training towards the end of February.
This month being January, so
Right,
this runs
January.
February, we got a thing going.
Towards the end of February, we'll be doing an evening training.
So for the people who don't have daytime, they can come in on that one.
Right.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you all on because I've done the hotline myself and I've used the hotline, I've been on the hotline, and I know there's probably people going to want to phone in and now say, can I talk to the lady in the red jacket? So, you know, if you phone the hotline, can you stress that there's a lot of people on the hotline, you can't always get the person you saw on AIDS Vision, you know? That all of our volunteers are of equal caliber?
All of our volunteers are thoroughly trained, and a lot of them have been doing this for a long time. Many of them know as much or more about AIDS than I do. And our policy basically is that you get to talk to the person that answers the phone.
And each one is as good as the other.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you for having you on, and I hope that people watching this do sign up and do. Are you short-handed at this point?
We have an ongoing need for volunteers. We are almost always short-handed. The times that we need people the most is daytimes and afternoons.
Well, please call in. Thank you for watching AIDS Vision. Tune in again.